Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships. Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and I am going to share with you a story. I've been recently talking with a friend of mine who had started a relationship with, it wasn't like a full-blown relationship thing. It was somebody he had met, and they discovered that they had a bit of an attraction for each other, and I think they went out on a couple of dates. But, the gist of it is that they'd kind of developed this sort of connection. And I think as it goes, when things kind of start out really well, it obviously creates some interest. You kind of feel like, wow, you can put your eggs in a basket and guard that basket. Because I think the conversation had really gone to the place where they says, they're gonna date. And then without much warning, there seemed to be like there was a shift. And I think all of us sense when somebody is pulling back. I'm going to describe it that way because you get, your phone calls, your text messages, and, in this day and age. And then when that seems to taper off, then you wonder, you sense that the shift in energy, I think is probably a good way to describe it. And this was the case. Now, that's not to say that this thing had got off hot and heavy, because I think all of us know that when something is real new, then, yeah, the interest is there, but you don't want to jump in and smother the person, because that creates those really weird feelings about, okay, what kind of person am I getting involved with here? Because I think we've all been in a situation where someone came on a little too strong, and that's one of the first no-nos. I think when you're developing a connection with someone, you want things to build. You want to have a reason for the gradual build. I mean, if you're doing a relationship where you just kind of jump off the cliff and you dive in, yeah, I guess maybe you sort of expect that intensity, that energy coming on. But I think for the most part, when you're getting to know someone, you do have to give it some time. And time is relative. It depends on how fast-paced your life is, but giving it time gives you an opportunity to reflect on the experience that you're having. So, for instance, let's say you go out on a date. One of the things that I suggest people do when they go out on that first date, and, that date is kind of like an interview as to whether you want to have a second date. That should be operating in the back of your mind. But you want to ask the kinds of questions that give you information about the individual you're interested in. If you're not delving into who that other person is, then you have to ask yourself, what's the point? I mean, if you say you're interested in seeing this person, because it's kind of like a job interview, I think, for both of you. And, asking questions, getting answers, reciprocating. That's what you do on first dates, that early part of the feeling each other out and getting that going. Well, my friend did that. They had some really interesting conversations and decided to go out and enjoy each other. So this thing kind of kicked off in a really good gear. And then things sort of fell off. And what he wondered is, okay, why the shift? Well, they finally had a conversation about what was going on, and the lady in this scenario decided that some other things were happening in her life, some things that had kicked off. She'd had some stuff that she had to deal with personally, which caused her to seek counseling. And I've always said, I think that's a good resource to have. If you're feeling something coming up for yourself, go to those people who you can trust and work those things out. Now, the information that came out in this session with the counselor was that, well, the lady probably shouldn't be dating. And when he found this out, he was disappointed at that revelation, because he had no inkling, even with all the questions and things that he had asked early on in, those first couple of meetings or first few meetings. There was no inclination that this is something that would kind of fall off the table like that. So he did the due diligence and then found this out later. So vis-a-vis, lots of disappointment. So now he's in the place of, well, what do I do? Well, clearly what he does is he has to face the reality that this thing isn't going to go the direction that he wanted it to go. But given that there was enough of a connection, she was honest with him, as you would hope any relationship to start out with. She gave him enough details to understand where she was at, that this particular connection isn't going to go anywhere right now, but they both left open the possibility of the future. Now, when that future may take place, who knows? That's open to the rest of the world. But given all of this stuff, given this explanation, I'm sure many of you who are listening have been in a very similar situation. So how do you get through something like this? How do you get to having an interest in someone and having all your due diligence, meaning asking the questions and, being gentlemen and gentlewomen and having all of that up front. And then you find that this thing is not going to go the way you wanted it to go right now. How do you handle that? Well, I think one of the things that you think about is, like I said, everything they did up front was correct. They had a great first couple of dates. They had the conversation. And the guy in this particular case didn't know a lot about her backstory. To me, I think that's something that probably would have come up down the road. But obviously, she had something that she felt she needed to deal with, which again did not happen with the new guy, because he didn't have any. There was no foreshadowing of anything like this for him, and I don't believe he was a catalyst for this. Again, this is something that's happening on her side, but I credit her for speaking the truth and not hiding something from him, so at least he can deal with it. That I give them both credit for, and I think just to say that, they're probably a pretty good match, because they've laid what I think is a real good foundation for at least a friendship at this point. And if something else were to surface down the road, or they can build on what they have now. So one of them wanted romance, or at least a possibility of, and the other one had to say no. So they're in this place of saying they're going to leave it open-ended. They're going to be friends. Now, they may or may not have a lot of contact because she's going to be working on her issues. One of the questions is, do you wait around? And I think that can be a roll of the dice, because you never really know what's going to happen down the road. This woman may actually come back, because she did say that in the future, she's actually the one that offered the idea of, hey, when I get things worked out, would you, be interested? And I'll call you if you're available. You're available, great. And he said, yeah, That would be nice. Look, I'm going to take a break right here, and I'm going to come back, and we will pick up right where I left off. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And we're back. So the critical question here becomes, all right, what do we do with the future of this situation? And they both left open the possibility of a down the road. And that's great. That's nice, because no one said, no, this won't work. But in practical, what's going to happen? Well, she's going to go off working on her issues. So what should the guy do? Should he wait around? Like I said, a roll of the dice. You never know what the future is going to bring. And what I would tell anyone in this situation is, how have you dealt with something like this in the past? And has it worked for you? If you've been one of those individuals who is, kind of who puts your life on hold, and that's what I think is a possibility here, then what's the possibility that something is going to come up for you? Because if you put your life on hold, then you have zero possibility of engaging in that. But if you leave yourself open to the other possibilities, because, this person showed up out of the blue. Your next possibility, maybe that's how it's supposed to work for you. This was an opportunity in your life to be in this place and then to learn to deal with this kind of moment so that you can pick up and move on. A lot of people get stuck in this very kind of place. They put themselves in a holding pattern. And while it may sound really romantic to just wait, like I said, with that roll of the dice, what are the chances? It sounds really nice for someone to be able to be available without any conditions. But I think it would be a mistake for him to just put his life on hold. I really think he should decide that the rest of his life, or if somebody else comes along, then to explore that possibility. Because I for one, know that feelings change. I mean, how you feel today about a particular individual and the availability, because his feelings are right now based on his perception about what he wanted in that relationship. But now that he finds out that person really isn't necessarily who he thought she was. So it's kind of like, okay, so what are you waiting for? So I think I think the healthy thing for him to do is to leave himself available for someone else and pursue that. Whether it's going on a dating app or dating the friend of a friend, because dating and what it is, it's really about finding out about the other individual, or the possibilities for you. So it doesn't mean that you have to get committed to someone right away, Because remember, this situation was one in which he had the opportunity to ask questions. She asked questions. They had some chemistry. And what happened is some things about her past came up, which had nothing to do with him. He just finds out about it. What they did, being adults, is they had a conversation about it and decided that they still like each other, but that the healthy thing for her was to really deal with her situation, her circumstances, whatever issues came up for her with a professional counselor. That's how she's going about it. So it's not just somebody just taking themselves out of the situation because they got cold feet. There are many people who have had that spark, that chemistry, and because of their own past, then yanked themselves out of it because, it felt like they were getting close. I think we've seen it. We've even experienced it, that it was so good, then we sabotaged it somehow. And I think those are important things to know about yourself. If you find yourself attracted to someone and you find yourself sabotaging your time or your opportunities to be with that person, you need to look at yourself in the mirror. Whether it's because you're being late, or you start telling lies, or any number of things that we do when we're sabotaging our success in being with other people. And it happens. Boy, that it happens a lot more than we realize. And for that reason, those are the kinds of things that you need to stop, take a step back, and really do some, analysis. So back to this moment, one of the things I encouraged him to do, I said, look, I want you on this day in your history, I want you to journal everything that's happened with this particular person at this moment, up till now, from the time you met them till that conversation that you had when you decided to, say, switch directions. Reason being, and writing down as many details as you possibly can. And the reason being is because the memory will fade. And whether it's the love connection that's there at one moment, or whichever direction it goes, the memory will fade. And I want you to have your own journal of where you were, what happened, because I believe coming back to that, if there is a reconnection, or if there is a similar situation that happens with another person, something, I believe in keeping this kind of detail about your relationship life. I mean, if it's something that you already do, you journal, great. Be sure and add this to it with all the detail to help you recall exactly what went on. Because invariably, let's say in this situation, let's run this down the road. They come back together and decide maybe they want to do the relationship thing. They will definitely want to pick up on this conversation. Because while she's in therapy, the likelihood that she's going to be sharing the details of that therapy, I think, are slim. And if I'm a therapist, I'm someone who's going to tell, I said, if I'm a therapist, I'm someone who's going to tell my client, you don't really need to be sharing a lot of details about what goes on in your therapy, because that's really just for you. And who you share that information with is very, very critical, because you have people who are not part of the process weighing in on it. And that kind of thing can sabotage your growth. This happens because there are still many people out there that have a stigma against having therapy as if it's a bad thing. And I personally don't think it is. I think we need to be selective about who we choose as a therapist. That can be challenging. But in and of itself, I think therapy is a good thing. It's a good place for you to go and share your problems with somebody who's going to be an advocate, someone who hopefully knows about your history. I mean, if it's a brand new thing, then you're going to have to develop that relationship. But if it's somebody who you've seen before then they know your history and they can help steer you in the right direction. And I think that's so vitally important. So one more thing, and I want to credit the young lady for being aware enough about herself to seek counseling, because that in and of itself is a healthy thing to do.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm John Johnson, talking about a pause to reflect. Now, what I shared with you about this relationship that was sort of had a beginning, but it's kind of been put on hold. In the first two segments, I've explained that in some detail. So let me cover why I think where they're at and why I think the romantic thing, and I'm just going to say it that way, that a lot of people would say, oh, just wait, she'll kind of come through. Some people tend to have that romantic notion that, the person is going to go through whatever they're going to go through, and you just wait, and you'll be the person waiting at the door when they come through it. I don't think that's a healthy choice. I think because they don't really have that much invested in this to want to do that. Now, if this really had a lot of time invested in it, and they had kids, and or something that really tied the two of them together, then waiting certainly it could seem very practical in that sense. But these two people are just two individuals that met, had some chemistry, and then things got put on hold. That kind of thing happens every day. And you can move on and develop a connection with someone else. Now, not saying that it's easy, but what I'm strongly advocating here is to recognize the reality of the situation, that there aren't really strong ties here in this situation. And if down the road something, the possibility of something happening manifests itself, then you can pick up there and go forward. But at this point, there really isn't any reason for, in this particular case, the guy to just wait around. And I wanted to say that specifically because having someone wait, because romance it's a very powerful thing. It makes people wait, and sometimes they're even blind to what is actually happening in the situation. And I'm not suggesting that this woman made up a story. Not that at all. But taking a different scenario where people don't know how to let someone down or maybe explain their own truth. They make up some story where, they might say that there's interest, but just not at this moment. See, that's almost has that, well, if I just wait around long enough, or if I try hard enough, or if I do one more thing, then this is going to work. And that's a trap that a lot of people find themselves into because, again, it has all of these romantic overtones. It's the kind of thing we see in movies. It's the kind of thing we hear in songs. We see it in poetry. So it's really seductive to want to do that. And being practical and being aware of exactly the circumstance, which is another reason why I said to write the stuff down. I mean, you can read it as many times as you want to, but I think over time, as you read that, what you have written, as you experience life, let's say let's move this down, say a couple of months, maybe 3 months down the road. One of the things that life provides you is opportunities to learn about yourself and others. But principally, I want to pick the opportunity for you to learn about yourself and how your feelings can change about things over time. As you gain new awareness about things that you experience and take that new knowledge and apply it to situations, it may help you reinterpret where you are. Now, this can be a really, really good learning opportunity for anyone. And it's not so much about rewriting your history as much as it is about reevaluating how your history will impact you in the future. Because at the moment situations happen, you know what you know at that time, and you respond. But given that same situation with new knowledge, you may respond differently. So, to recap, you may feel that right now, this would be the relationship that you would want. Speaking of the guy relating to the lady who's going to go off and deal with her things. Like I say, it's really romantic. He's going to sit there and wait. But down the road, he may decide that this is not really the best situation for him. And waiting around, you may not have a lot of time. You never know what your timeline or what your trajectory is. And you have to really think about where you are in life and what you want. And in this particular case, as I've talked about with this guy, they don't have ties. Really. They had an emotional moment. They had a spark, a connection, which, lasts, boom, that long. It seems like it's something they could come back to because they've been very upfront, very above board about where the situation is. And I might add, that's a very adult thing to be able to do, to have that conversation and to lay it out and to explain what's going on. See, that is the kind of thing that when you do it, when it's done right, like this situation has been, for the conversation and the explanation, that's something worth investing in. So it's worth revisiting down the road if the opportunity is there. But in the instance of what to do, and that's why I talk about a pause to reflect, it's deciding that you go on with your life. Remember, they've agreed that they have a connection, a friendship. So they understand that they can call and chat about things in general. And that'll be great. Now, what they decide to do inside the friendship, whether they will go out as friends or catch a movie or something, they'll have to determine, the comfort level with that. Because a lot of people would say that that's more of a date, more of a romantic kind of thing. And again, you got to work out those details. Everybody has their own free will to decide how that reflects who they are. But I think these two people did it right. the above board, the conversation, and that I think is right now the best outcome that they could possibly have. And that's a great outcome. I'm John Johnson, and this is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, talking about a pause to reflect.